You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan White.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Today's topic is perspective control, and what better way to control your photographic perspective than subscribing to the B&H Photography Podcast. It's free and easy. Just go to iTunes and sign up if you're not already a subscriber. And if you'd like better insight into our show, head over to the B&H Photography Podcast homepage on the B&H Explorer website, where you're going to find show notes, which, by the way, are also on iTunes. You could catch all kinds of additional info about the show, photographs, related links, my gearhead picks, and other insightful nuggets of info pertaining to our podcast. In fact, skip the podcast, just go to the notes and you got it. You can save yourself an hour of time. No, just joking there. Okay, let's start with Al's gearhead pick of the week. We just found out that there's a Nikon D850 DSLR, and most of you have probably also heard about it. It was described by one of our colleagues as a camera that checks all of the boxes Nikon users have been asking to be checked. We're going to be doing an in-depth look at the camera on an upcoming episode, but for now, you should know that this camera is the Nikon with the highest resolving power at 45.7 megapixels, has a native ISO up to 25,600, a tilting touchscreen LCD, 4K UHD video at 30 frames per second, continuous shooting at 7 frames per second for up to 51 images, and Wi-Fi connectivity. I said the word this time. I got it right. Yeah. We actually have the camera here floating around the office, and we're all pretty impressed with it. I'm more of a mirrorless guy right now, and it's been a while since I've picked up a DSLR that gets me going. This camera's nice. It feels great in the hand. The features are wonderful. And if I was looking at a new system right now, I would definitely take this camera into consideration.
All right, then.
There you have it.
Don't forget about Todd over there.
Right. Hi, Todd. Hi. Yeah, aside from the usual suspects here in the show, today we are joined by Todd Vorenkamp, who, if you're a regular listener to the show, you know that Todd knows his stuff. He writes for Explorer. He's the director of our team and a wonderful person. A good shooter, too. We're going to be talking about TiltShift Lenses, and the reason why we're going to be doing, one of the reasons, aside from the fact that we haven't talked about these yet, is that Canon recently released 3 new TiltShift lenses. They already had a whole series of them. They had a 17 millimeter, a 24, 45, and it was a 90, I believe. And now they have a 50, an upgraded 90, and a 135 f4. These are all L lenses. And what's kind of neat about these, all 3 of the new Canon TiltShift lenses are macros. They all go to half-life size. And prior to this, only 2 or 3 TiltShift lenses that are available were able to do that. This seems to be a new direction. They also do, they have better coatings to them, and they go a little bit further as far as tilt and shift applications, but we're going to come back to that.
But why do you think Canon has done this? Why do you think they've taken this opportunity to release 3 TiltShift lenses? Is there a trend? Is there some reason that we...
well, people are using them more. It's used not just... They were traditionally made for really architecture and product photography to correct converging lines, or keystoning, as it's called in architecture. I've been using it for a zillion years, some of the earlier ones to the newest ones. And what's most interesting about the 3 new lenses, aside from the fact that they all go down to half-life size, is that the 135 in particular, no one's ever made a 135 for 35 millimeter format. Right. So people traditionally think of TiltShift lenses as wide angle because they're used for architecture, and that's, you need something wide to take in a large field from close distances. But now you could shoot from a distance and do corrections, or you could do really tight product shots with a longer focal length, because just like regular photography, the choice of the lens affects the look and feel of the mood of the picture. So now we have more options for tilt shifts.
Yeah, I don't want to get ahead of Alan's notes, but Nikon released the 19 millimeter PC Nikkor last year at a very high price point. The weird thing is correcting images for geometric distortion in Lightroom or Photoshop is getting better and better. So you might make the argument that these lenses are less and less important. But
Yeah,
here we are having.
We will be making that argument.
Well,
Yeah.
what? Here we are.
That's why we're paying you $7 to
Right.
be here today.
But Canon and Nikon obviously disagree, so they're putting out new stuff.
Well, you know, there is a good argument, and we'll come back to that. Yes, you can do a lot of these effects post-capture in light. However, there is a difference, and I know that you just recently did a whole article about that, and we were looking at images on your screen.
Right.
And there's a reason
not
why
done
you
yet, but-
would and would not, and there's a good argument for both. First, let's back up here. What are tilt-shift lenses? Tilt-shift lenses are they used to be wide-angle lenses. Now they're wide-angle to short telephoto. If you shoot with a camera other than a view camera, you want to straighten converging lines. They're also called correcting perspective or PC lens. You have two choices. The quick and easy way, as we just said, is the magic of pixel interpolation in Photoshop or Lightroom. And the second way is in-camera corrections using perspective control or a tilt-shift lens. Both methods work, but if you want to maintain the highest levels of image quality and the most control, you're better off doing it in-camera with a tilt-shift. And again, we're going to come back to that.
I think the creativity aspect is well, you should know, because when you're doing something in Lightroom, that's the application, that's what you want to fix. I mean, a tilt shift lens gives you a lot of options of things to do, not just
Oh yeah.
And we're going to get to all this. I realize.
Yeah, we're going to touch on all this stuff.
but
But
it
yeah,
kinda
it's
opens
more
up-
than correcting. It's a lot of adjustments. That
Yeah,
you
as
can
opposed
do.
to just a fix, it can broaden your creativity. It can give you a new perspective.
There are depth of field issues that you could deal with in camera that you can't do post capture. We're much limited. You know, there's just a limit to what you can do. So, what are PC? That's perspective control and tilt shift lenses. PC and tilt-shift lenses, they produce larger image circles compared to standard 35mm lenses. That's one of the basics of it. If you were to look through a lens, pass light through it, you'd see it puts out a circle of light. That's your image circle. And most of the 35mm lenses, they have enough of a circle to capture a sharp 24 by 36mm frame within that circle. Tilt-shift lenses, they have much larger circles, which means that you could adjust where that 24 by 36mm frame resides. You could move it up and down diagonally across. You could selectively crop within the circle. Many of these PC lenses, even though they're 35mm lenses, the image circle is large enough to cover medium format cameras. So in a sense, they're medium format lenses being used on 35mm cameras. A PC lens, two different types. The earliest lenses of this type were just called PCs. They only offered shift, which means that you could slide the lens up, down, left, or right. And it was used primarily for architecture and product, for correcting converging lines. So rather than tilt the camera upwards or look upwards, like as if we would be doing it ourselves, you simply slide the lens upwards on its mount without having to otherwise move, reposition, or tilt the camera. So you aim the camera straight at the building, and rather than aim the camera up, you slide the lens up and the image itself readjusts in the frame. You lock it in and take your picture. You could also play around with selective focusing much more than just opening and closing the aperture. By tilting the lens will shift up and down. It also tilts as if it's bowing left or right, up or down. You could adjust the plane of focus, which means that you could bring things in focus, out focus, without even stopping your lens down. We'll talk a little bit about more of that too. A lot of cameras have this toy or miniature filter that emulates the look of a tilt shift lens, but only gives you it won't increase your focus, it'll decrease it. And these cameras, these lenses also, it should be noted, are only for use with reflex cameras. That's SLRs and DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, no rangefinders. So if you have a Leica M camera and you want to do tilt shift, you're out of luck. A bit of history. First tilt-shift lens was designed by an Austrian military officer named Pflug, and it was designed for eliminating distortions in aerial photographs. And the first commercially available PC lens, it only did shift, no tilt, was a 35mm f3.5. It was made by Nikon in 1961. I owned one of those. It was followed by a wider 28mm f4 in 1968. I've owned two of those. And both were followed by faster and sharper versions, a 35-2.8 and a 28-3.5. I've owned one of each of those.
I owned a 28 for a while.
Yeah, and it was great. I used to
Good
go
lens.
around photographing architecture with a 4x5. I shot black and white, and then I'd pull out my Nikon with the 28 PC, and I'd shoot Kodachromes or whatever I'm doing. And I have wonderful little 35mm color backups. Canon joined the party in 1973 when they introduced the first tilt-shift lens. It was a Canon TS35mm f2.8 SSC, and Olympus soon followed with a 35 and 24mm shift-only lenses, followed by similar lenses by Minolta, Pentax, and Schneider. Schneider made the PC lenses a 28mm for Leica R cameras, which you, Todd, have adapted for a Nikon and you use often.
That's true.
Yeah, it's a very nice lens.
Now those Olympus and Minoltas, are they usable today?
Yeah, if you have a mirrorless camera, absolutely. And they're priced really well. We recently had a Canon, that early 35mm Canon tilt shift, and it was only a few $100s, and it would be easily adaptable to just about any mirrorless camera out there right now.
A friend of mine used the Olympus and said it's an amazing lens.
It is.
You can get it for next to nothing these days.
Although now that we've said this on the podcast with our zillions of listeners,
Right.
That's it. Head to eBay immediately.
Right. Buy it before you listen to this podcast, and then sell it after you listen to the podcast.
We should open a market space, right? Take a little tip from
Let us
Japan
know
Camera Hunter.
Let us know what you're trying to sell, and we'll bump the value up by telling everyone how good it is.
Exactly. How about the Shine Pflug Principle?
Yes.
Can somebody offer me a
Okay, it's
definition of
really,
that?
really simple. Okay, if you take a flashlight and aim it straight at say a white piece of paper, okay, you get a round image, a round ball of light if you're parallel to it. If you tilt the paper, what happens to the ball of light? It sort of flares out at the far end, sort of like a comet shape, okay? That's exactly what happens to the image when you focus your lens onto film or a sensor. If you're looking at straight at parallel lines, so you're looking directly at a building, okay, your parallel lines remain parallel. You tilt up, the image starts to stretch, and you get suddenly things start falling apart. It looks like the building is tilting over or falling back or something like that. So what a tilt shift lens does, it corrects the plane of focus to be parallel to the wall again, and parallel lines remain parallel, and there's no converging lines. So the bottom of the building and the top of the building are the same width. They don't flare out or fall in or anything like that. So that's really what it is. You're basically tilting the lens groups to complement the angle of the subject that you're photographing. And when as soon as you get to the point where it's parallel, it looks correct. It always has kind of a funny look about it, though. There is an oddness to it, but it looks right. It's kind of goofy.
The human eye sees converging lines.
Yes.
So you can correct with a shift lens. You can correct a wall or a building to the point where it looks unnatural because you've maintained those straight lines. Whereas if you were standing there with your own eyes, you would see some convergence. Right. And people don't understand, but if you take the classic desert highway scene where you're standing in the middle of a 2-lane highway looking to the horizon, as the road goes further and further away from you, it gets narrower and narrower.
Or railroad tracks.
Railroad tracks. Don't stand on railroad tracks.
Yeah.
That's dangerous. Nor should you stand in the middle of a road. But everyone knows that, has that visual. Buildings do the same thing. A 1-story building, 2-story building, you're not going to see it. But if you stand at the base of the World Trade Center or another building that's not tapered, and you look up, it will look tapered.
And if you have grid lines, you could see it very easily.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, obviously, when you're shooting a tall tower, these lenses aren't going to work. I mean, just simply, you're not going to get everything.
Really wide angle.
Not true. It depends how far back you can get. Yeah. If you're standing across the street from a 100-story building, no, you're not correcting it. Right. However, if you're standing 5 blocks away, yeah, you are.
Yeah.
So that's really,
depends on the lens and your distance.
Yeah, the focal length, the height of your subject, and the distance.
Yep. The other interesting thing you can do with a shift lens is you can shoot panoramics by shifting.
Yeah.
Yes.
And some of the older shift lens, when you get to the extreme ranges of the shift, you start to get some softness. But if you're shooting mirrorless, and especially crop sensor, you can deflect a shift lens from end to end without moving your camera or adjusting your tripod and shoot a panoramic in that fashion. And it works really well.
Yes.
When I played with one of these lenses, I would do the opposite, just kind of make light trails going up and down the frame, which kind of worked well if you're doing some urban, landscape photography. It kind of is fun to play with. So, but just the general idea or the main point that I think I want to pass on to our listeners, you're adjusting the relationship of the lens to the film plane.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
You're adjusting the relationship. normally it's parallel, it's flat.
Mm-hmm.
But with a tilt shift lens, you can angle it and create different effects.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
Yeah, and the tilt is very different than the shift.
right?
And so, like Alan said, some of the older lenses only did shift. Now, I don't think anybody makes one that doesn't do.
No,
tilt
they're
with
all
it.
tilt
Yeah.
shift now. That's correct. Yeah.
And the tilt, besides using it you can use it for geometric corrections, but you can also go do the toy camera effect
Right.
where you get an incredibly shallow depth of field because with the Pflug Principle, probably did not say that right.
One of the best examples of depth of field manipulation I ever did myself. I think I might have mentioned on another show once. I was using 24 millimeter.
Right.
Might have been a Nikkor because they make a 24. A lot of people make 24s. We'll list those all in a little bit. And I was doing a photograph. There was a fence post in the foreground about a foot away from my camera, from the lens.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a small stone cottage about, I'm going to say 25 feet behind that. And I focused on the post, which is, again, about a foot away from my lens. And then without stopping the lens down, remaining at f2.8, the widest aperture, I tilted the lens forward. And what I do is I angled the lens elements so that they were bringing both the fence post and the building in the background into the same plane of focus. What stayed out of focus was the sky and the ground, which was not visible. And at f2.8, I was able to hold total sharpness between 1 foot away and about 20 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
And then I stopped down 3 stops to increase my resolving power, and everything was in sharp, 2.5, 3 stops down from maximum aperture. It's great stuff.
Yeah. Not only can you get incredibly shallow depth of field effects, but you get incredibly deep depth of field effects with a shift lens. So it's the equivalent of using a view camera on a 35 millimeter
Or mirrorless, yeah.
or mirrorless camera.
Another thing you could do, which is kind of interesting, say you had a large backdrop and you set up, say, 2 rows of 6 people in a V formation, the 2 people in the front standing right there, and then they sort of flare out to you like an arrowhead, so you'd like the V shape going away from you.
Mm-hmm.
So the people, the furthest, are to the right and to the left extreme. If you focus with a tilt shift lens, it's possible to, by tilting left or right, you could bring everyone on the left side into focus at wide aperture and knock everybody else out. And then by flipping the angle that you're shooting from, reverse the tilt of the lens, bring the other group in. So you could actually, without touching f-stops, you could grid control over what's in focus, what isn't, and you could split the difference on it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, my question has to do with aperture, and in general, the widest aperture, maximum aperture I'm seeing is 2.8. Now, is that just a product of cost and size, or is there not much of an advantage? I
would imagine if you go, these lenses are already big. If you handle them, they're kind of massive because there's a lot of stuff going on here to get these things to work. They're also all manual focus. There's no autofocus going on here. You manually focus. The fastest ones are 2.8, and I have a feeling it might have to do with cost because they are pretty pricey. Some of them are anyway. And it might also have to do with just resolving power. It may not be possible to be that sharp, wide open with these lenses. I'm not quite sure.
Most of the time, you're shooting these on a tripod anyway.
Yes.
So you don't need to open up to 1.4 to allow light in to reduce shake. So
yeah, you can hand hold these things, but it's not recommendable.
If you're using a shift, if you're tilting, hand holding is a possibility. If you're shifting,
I've done it. You got to shoot a lot to get one that's good.
Yeah, you're kind of defeating the whole point of that.
Have you seen the 135? The new Canon 135?
I've seen pictures of it now.
Okay, I imagine it's pretty big, right?
I would assume so,
right.
yes.
Okay.
The 85 to 90s are pretty hefty, and this is bigger than those.
At the top of the pyramid, the Schneider PCTS lenses they look normal size in the photos on the website, but if you buy one, you will be surprised at how large it is.
Yes, lift with your knees, not your back. Yeah.
It is a big lens.
Yep.
Right.
They're beautiful, and they're very cool, but it is, do not plan on dropping it in your camera bag. It's like taking it for a walk.
Quick question. And again, I'm going to try to word this correctly, but there's a difference between mount rotation and a tilt shift axis rotation. Can you clarify that for me?
Yeah, so on I use
certain lenses offer that and others don't.
I use the Leica Schneider shift lens, and you can rotate the lens without rotating the camera, just like almost like a telephoto with a collar.
Right.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. So you
there's a knob that offers a release, and you twist the whole thing.
Yeah. Actually, on the Schneider, you just turn it. It's pretty. There's a good detent and resistance, but that allows you to rotate at 90 degrees and shift in a totally different direction, or rotate it at a 45-degree angle, which I haven't discovered why you would want to do that, but.
Yeah, the older Nikon PC lenses, you could rotate them 360 degrees, and there were 12 detents along the way, so you had little markers.
Yeah, same with the Rokinon.
Yeah, that's a pretty common thing.
I would say the Rokinons are, I've heard good things about them. If you look on the website, they actually get really good reviews, and they're fairly reasonable compared to some of the
Very
new
reasonable. Yeah, I used one about 4 or 5 years ago. I did a review on one. Yeah, it was great.
The other inexpensive way to get into this is through LensBaby. That is kind of how LensBaby started, was doing tilt, not necessarily traditional TiltShift lenses, but some of them had little geared attachments that allowed you to deflect it.
Right.
So.
Well, this is something I want to get. Well, might as well get to it now. But there seems to have been a trend, and I don't know where we'll say this trend started. Maybe it was the fact that people liked the toy mode that you got in point and shoot.
Our former guest Vincent LaFray, he opened a lot of people's eyes to that, and a lot of TV shows reopened. I should say. I mean, even he said, "I didn't invent this, but everyone thinks I'm responsible for this." And he made that look very popular. And shooting, cityscapes from the sky. You see it a lot in advertising, editorial. And again, even like the portraiture people are using it. There's a lot of different applications that the lenses were never even intended for.
The miniature look that you get.
It's kind of like bokeh, where your eyes, as you've said before, your eyes produce bokeh, but it's not like what you see in a photograph or on a video. And the same thing is like with a shift lens or going into the toy mode or whatever, you can get a very unique visual effect that your eyes cannot reproduce. So you're seeing something that you don't usually see. I think that's the attraction.
Right. Can we jump to like the general applications? I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but you obviously talked about at the beginning architecture as the primary one. But is there other applications that? Am I jumping ahead?
No. Architecture is interiors and exteriors. I mean, that's where I started using them. I used to do a lot of interiors and art of yachts and homes and buildings and stuff. I use them all the time, and they were terrific. They were huge time savers, especially since we didn't have scanners and Photoshop back then, back in the good old days.
Right. But you want a wide angle so that you can get into these spaces or include a building. And that wide angle is going to obviously increase distortion, and then these will counter effect that, so you can get a nice clean image of a
different type of distortion. The Schneider, as good as it is, I still get a little pin cushion that I have to remove. Even the shifting doesn't get rid of that, so you'll get traditional distortions as all other lenses will produce, but you can get rid of the geometric ones with the shift.
That's another. By the way, we're talking about pricing. These lenses are all over the place. They go from anywhere from $700 to $5,000. And we're going to go through all the lenses that are available. There are some of the less expensive ones here, and those would be from Rokinon and Samyang. And we touched on these lenses. They both make 24mm f3.5 tilt shifts for Canon, Nikon, Sony, Pentax, a whole bunch of mounts that they're available for. These lenses are real sharp. No two ways about it. Extremely sharp. The difference is the materials they're made out of. These lenses are a lot more plastic, polymer, and things of that sort. The tolerances aren't as good.
Well, remember, there's a lot of moving parts and knobs, and that was my problem with the Rokinon, that the knobs themselves were not as strong. And I even after a couple of weeks of use, I could feel that there was going to be problems locking the lens into the position you need to hold it into.
Oh yeah, no. If you're going to be a cowboy with these things, using them on a daily basis, no, you have to go for the good ones. Another thing about them is that everyone talks about it. Are they sharp? Are they sharp? Very few lenses these days are not sharp. That's a given. Sharp lenses are easy to make. The big drawback of the less expensive ones is that many of them suffer from not only pin cushion and barrel distortions, which are relatively easy to fix. They also have what's called mustache distortion, where like a wax mustache, you got all these little swirls that go up and down, around and about. And if you try to photograph architecture with these lenses, it kind of comes a little bit of a funhouse mirror effect going on there that if you can correct some of it, but they're more of a bear. And again, you want to shoot landscapes and things of that sort. That's perfectly fine. But for real critical work, that's where they get kind of funky. So
So it sounds like the best idea is the combination of a tilt-shift lens with Lightroom
yeah,
fixes.
yeah. And there are a lot of fixes for these things. But, again, we want to have less work, not more work at the end of the day.
We mentioned the digital corrections. A lot of post-processing software allows you to get rid of vertical and horizontal distortion, which is the purpose of the shift lens.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Snapseed on your phone allows you to do it with your smartphone photos. So the question people keep asking is, do I need a shift lens or a tilt shift lens when I can do this stuff in Lightroom?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know the answer to that question.
That was my question.
That was your got ahead of you.
But if you did know the answer, what do you think it would be?
It would. It's a matter of preference. So, and it's probably a matter of budget because these are not cheap lenses. So, you can achieve the effect digitally without special equipment. The ironic thing is a lot of people that are asking these questions fall into the category of pixel peepers, where they are obsessed about sharpness, obsessed about megapixels and things like that. If you are doing a geometric correction in Lightroom or Photoshop, you're, in a sense, generating new pixels and compressing other pixels because there's an algorithm happening and it's making, it's producing information where information doesn't exist. It's stretching your image file and it's compressing compressing it in other places. So if you're a pixel peeper, you will see you lose resolution in those areas. It's very subtle and it's very small, but if that's what you like to do, zoom into your pictures at 200, 300, 400% on your computer, you will see a difference. In a print, probably not. There's one of the advantages of using the shift lens, especially when you're shooting architecture. You're working off a tripod, that slows you down. The shift lens adds another, I won't say it's a hindrance to the process. It just makes you more careful. Yeah. So you're thinking more about the photo, the composition, the framing, and things like that. It makes you more deliberate, and that is usually in photography a good thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that idea. And you guys know me, I tend to just kind of shoot away. And when using these lenses, you slow down and you adjust. But that also gives you moments of creativity, and you'll learn things, you'll see things, you'll be in the midst of this process. You're going to find new things, and for me, that's the benefit.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, you can do that in Lightroom too. People are very creative when they sit in front of a computer, but for me,
the thing is, the image quality itself. You have a much healthier, beefier image file.
Yeah.
That from there you're working with a good quality file. Whereas if you're doing it, if you're correcting electronically, you already have a disadvantage. You're already handicapped as far as image quality.
And then if you're doing extreme corrections on Lightroom or Photoshop, that's when it starts to get kind of ugly. I've shot the exact same building, shifted and unshifted, corrected in Lightroom, and didn't correct the shifted one because I didn't have to. When you put them side by side, you see there's a subtle difference in how they look. But if you didn't have one of those images and you only had the shifted or you only had the electronically corrected one, you wouldn't notice that there's a difference in the image. So
this is a subject I'd like to, maybe we can hear from some listeners, some of their input on this in terms of reasons that they would shoot with a tilt shift lens or adjust.
Yeah.
I've had tilt shift lenses. My type of photography doesn't lend itself to doing tilt. So all I care about is the shift. And actually I kind of wish Nikon or Canon or someone would make a less expensive shift lens, and I forget the tilt, forget the mechanicals of that.
In the most simple words, describe what shift is and what tilt is.
So shift moves the lens parallel to the image plane. So, or right or left, up or down. So, and even though you're moving only a couple millimeters, literally on your camera, on the front of your lens is only shifting several millimeters in front of your camera, that translates into dozens of feet, I guess, in the actual image, depending on how far away the building is or what you're shooting. So,
by the way, lenses go anywhere from 8 to about 12 millimeters in shift, plus minus. That's the range,
12,
which is a lot.
Yeah. And then the tilt is when you tilt the lens to skew the image plane basically.
Right. Okay. That's
And
pretty.
you get it's a very different effect.
That's for the selective focus.
That's
Yeah,
when you're
selective
changing your plane of focus
The plane,
is what's
yep.
being changed there. Whereas when you do a shift, your focus is steady. Your focus does not change whatsoever.
Right.
So it seems like 24 millimeter is something that all the manufacturers offer. You imagine that's kind of the...
That was as wide as it got for
Yeah.
the longest time.
Was it? Now, compared to a standard 24 millimeter lens, what would we be losing with the tilt shift lens?
When you stop, there's no well, it depends on the lens. Auto diaphragm, that could be an issue.
Auto functions.
Yeah, there's
no autofocus.
There's no auto diaphragm, so many of them have a lever on the lens to open and close the diaphragm, and then you also have an aperture ring where you dial in the ring. So like on the Leica that I shoot, you throw the lever, it opens it up to 2.8, even though you're dialed to f8 or something. Once you let all that light in to compose your shot, you flip the lever back and it closes it down to f8. They're all manual focus. But I used to have, I had a Leica, or no, I'm sorry, I had a Nikon 28 millimeter lens, and I bench tested it against the Leica Shift 28, and the Leica lens was better. I mean, I think I might have had a bad example of that Nikon.
Is this the original 28?
Yeah.
Those are very good lenses, but
Yeah.
they compared to what's out there today,
Yeah.
especially around the edges, no, they're not real good. They were wonderful back then. They're not as good today, especially if you have digital.
You could use that 24 or 28 as a normal lens. You just don't shift, don't tilt, and
I actually
it's just
did for a
big.
while. It's bulky. You don't want. It's a lot to haul around. They're big, massive, and they got things sticking out of them.
It's not the most portable lens you'll ever own.
And in terms of applications, I know we talked architecture and product photography.
Landscaping.
Landscape. is something we should talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the way, here's an interesting thing that
Portraiture.
a lot of
Talk
people
about
are using that.
landscape first. Yeah, go ahead.
Here's an interesting little thing where a tilt shift lens actually bailed me on a photograph. I had to photograph I think it was a 3-story building, and I was able to get out into the middle of the street to photograph. It was kind of a side street that it was on, and I was able to get a really nice composition with the building centered in the frame. The problem is that on the left side there was a telephone pole that was about 3 feet too far to the right, and to get straight at the building, the pole was there. And I was able to eliminate it by doing a very simple little trick. I moved my camera to the right about 3.5 feet, and I kept watching, and I waited until, from my vantage point, the pole was off to the left enough where I was able to get the whole building. I then got everything nice and parallel, and then I shifted the lens so that I was able to center the building in the frame. So I was looking at the building slightly sideways from the side, but squaring it off, and it looked good. If you look carefully, there was a little cupola on the top, and if you look at the cupola, you could see the right side of it, but you couldn't see the left. But otherwise, it was symmetrical, and it was kind of an optical illusion. But because I had a shift lens, I was able to photograph the building and get the pole out of the picture.
The people that install light poles, trees, and things like that around cities do not think about the photographer who's going to be hired to photograph that building.
Yeah, and there are large, white, ugly trucks that do park in the building.
Not to mention parking spots.
Parking spots.
Yeah.
By the way, it's an interesting thing.
What about-
We talk just a fast one. If you have a mirrorless camera and you're looking at tilt shift lenses, yes, you can adapt most any of these tilt shift lenses to any camera. It's mirrorless, but be careful of one thing. Some have an aperture ring, some don't.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the new Nikon 19 tilt shift does not have an aperture ring. So if you're shooting mirrorless, you're going to be wide open the whole time.
Yeah.
It's got electronic diaphragm, so you can't even. There's no way around it.
Yeah. So if you're going to do that, make sure you get yourself a lens that has a diaphragm
converter.
ring.
Yeah.
What about using
Well,
these-
even with the diaphragm ring, you can't, because it's the new 19 tilt shift is electronic diaphragm, so you need electricity to move.
I have a friend who could hack that.
Go. Let me know.
APS-C sensors, is there any
They don't make
issues, any
I don't
difference?
think they make any PCs for them
so-
specifically.
But using
no.
one of these lenses on an APC is going to make there's no difference, right?
Advantage and disadvantage. I've shot that Leica 28 or shift lens on a full frame high resolution camera, and you get softness around the edges, especially when you shift it. You start to get
to the
softness.
extremes, yeah.
On APS-C,
Sharp.
I can shift that all the way, and it stays sharp corner to corner.
Because you're using that tight center part of the...
The disadvantage is it's a 28 TiltShift lens, which is now a 42,
Right.
which every once in a while I'm like, man, I wish this thing was wider, because I'll be in a tight spot or an interior, and 42 is fair. It's a little wide, but sometimes,
No.
Yeah. By the way, you're talking about depth of field and stuff like that and sharpness. These lenses go down to f22, sometimes even f32. And in various, if you're shooting architecture, you are stomping down for two reasons. Number one, as you mentioned, the edges are softer. With any image circle on any lens, as you get to the edges, you start to lose it. That's where they're known to lose it. These lenses are no different. If you shift to an extreme, yes, you're going to start getting softness. You stomp the lens down, you could regain a lot of that sharpness back. Another thing that these lenses are known for is that you can vignette. There's light loss towards the edges, which is a natural phenomenon. Right. Stomp the lens down, and you could usually regain most of that luminescence on the corners.
Okay, so product photography, we can understand why you have a box, you have a carton, you want it to look like the shape that it should look like. What about still lifes? It would seem like...
Same thing, because you can actually give the impression that you're looking straight at it, yet you could be peering over the top or off the side. I remember I was once playing around with some small toy cars, and I got down below the level of the cars, and I was looking up at them. They're coming right at me, but they were little toy cars, but they looked real because there was this massiveness. You were looking at it from a point of view that you normally not see a toy from.
And we think of some of the great still life photographers, most of them are using medium format, I would imagine, at least the ones I'm thinking of anyway. But that might give you the sense of what's going on here when you have your bellow and you're sliding the bellow here in order to adjust the front element. And of course your film plane is staying standard.
A lot of, it doesn't happen much anymore, but a lot of the old classic landscape photographers used to do still life with their large format cameras.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like Edward Weston's Pepper is a perfect example.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and we come back, we're going to talk about who makes what and what's available for what cameras. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. Send us a tweet at BH Photo Video, hashtag BH Photo Podcast.
Okay, we are back with John Harris and Todd Gorenkamp, and we're going to talk about what's available around for TiltShift lenses from the different companies in different formats. And let's start off with Canon. Canon has probably most extensive. They have 6 different lenses. There was a 17 that they've had for a few years. I've used that one. It's pretty good. The 24mm 3.5, which is a second version. These are all L series lenses, by the way. There's a 45mm. And by the way, all the Canon, they're called TSE, for TiltShift-E, which I guess is for electronic coupling. Now, what's interesting is that Canon had a TSE 45mm 2.8, and one of the new lenses is the TSE 50mm f2.8. What's the big deal? Well, it's a lot. First of all 3 of the new Canon lenses, the 50, 90, and 135, they're all macro lenses. They go down to half life size. The 45mm focus down to 15.5 inches. The new 50 goes down to 10.6 inches. So, again, a big difference there.
And is the 45 an L series?
No, you know what? It may not be. I think that might be the only lens that is not an L, unless I left the letter out on this list here. So don't quote. But, I think there's actually something to that. I don't believe the 45
Well, the
was
price
an L.
would indicate it might not be. It's one of the more affordable.
Yes.
Same with the older 90.
Yeah, the older 90.
Does not have a red ring.
That's correct. Yes. Yes. And the new 50 also goes from 8.5, has tilt shift plus minus tilt of 8.5 degrees, and maximum shift of 12, which is up 1 millimeter from the prior lens. The 90mm 2.8 goes down to 1 foot and 1.3 feet, also as a macro, and the 135 is really nice. That goes focuses down to 1.61 feet, and has Again, tilt and shift capabilities, and the latest of their spheric and UHD elements. There's the best glasses in these lenses.
They're about $2,200 each.
But these are also extremely sharp, incredibly well built, and again, this is all about precision.
Right.
Nothing wiggles on these lenses.
And they're not yet available. Just
No.
they're available for pre-order.
That's correct. That's
I
correct.
don't even think they have them in the store yet.
Nope.
Actually. Yeah.
Nope.
And that 45 is not an L series lens.
Okay, just check. Okay, so we're not. All right, so but the new ones are. And by the way, I've shot with the 45. It's a brilliant lens. It may not be an L, but it is a very, very good performing lens.
Do those come out before the L designation, perhaps? Or
I
is
believe
that-
so.
Oh, yeah.
No, you
Or
know,
no,
no.
no.
Excuse me, no, because the L's been around for decades.
Okay.
They were the
Shows you what I know about
yeah.
Canon.
that big 1200 millimeter monster Canon telephoto. That was an L, and that goes back to a long time ago.
Mid-'80s.
Yeah.
All right.
So that's from Canon. So you got 17, 24, 45, 50, 90, and 135. Again, if you're an architect, if an architectural photographer, if you're a product photographer, these are really, really amazing tools. These are the kind of tools that you buy them and you'll be using them for forever. These are not fad kind of lenses. These always have good applications. Nikon has 4 lenses. They just introduced recently the 19 millimeter f4 EED. Which is Nikon's widest, and you shot with that, right?
Yes, it's beautiful.
Okay. It's a gorgeous lens.
Yeah, super sharp, great mechanicals. The downside is there's no adjustable aperture ring, so if you adapt it to a different camera, you're stuck at f4.
But if you pop it on your brand new D850,
You can shoot at f8.
It's sweet.
At f4, it was really, really good, so I can't imagine how...
Yeah. If you're in the Nikon system and you like focusing close, they do make 2 micro Nikors. There's a 45 and 85 millimeter. They're both f2.8 ED lenses, and they both go down to half-life size. I've used 3 out of 4 of the PCE Nikor lenses, the 24, 45, and 85. 19 I have not used yet, but the 3 that I have used are wonderful lenses. And again, the 45 and the 85 are micro Nikors. They're macro lenses. And with all of these tilt-shift lenses, the best they do is half-life size, which is not too shabby.
Too shabby.
Not too shabby.
Well, that Nikon, the 19 that I'm looking at is pretty pricey. It's a $3,400 lens compared to the other 2.
Which are a little over 2,000.
A little over 2,000. So
There's a big difference there, yes.
Nano crystal super integrated fluorine coating. It's pretty hot stuff.
Yeah, they don't get cavities. It's very interesting.
And it'll tilt shift jointly, singly, and no need for locking down, as we were talking about.
Yeah, in the 19 millimeter. Yeah, they improved some of the movements on it. Okay, Schneider makes lenses. They have several lens choices here, and they are adaptable for Sony, Canon, Sony A mount. I should qualify that. Canon and Nikon.
not adaptable. They're actually made with.
They're made
with
for
that
the mount.
mount.
Yes,
Yeah.
the dedicated mounts. The Schneider, these are all called PCTS, so perspective control tilt shift, super angulon lenses. This is the best that Schneider makes. They have a 28 millimeter f4.5, a 50 millimeter 2.8, and a 125.6, which is actually made for the Mamiya 645 AF, and I guess the Phase 1 Mamiya will also go on. It's for the film cameras and digital medium format. And I believe let's see what we got here. I think it's the equivalent of about a 74, 76 millimeter in 35 millimeter forms.
One of the cool things with the Schneiders is, I mentioned they're huge, but they don't have knobs on the side that you twist.
Right.
It's all controlled by the rings around the cameras.
Yeah.
They have really cool
Yes.
mechanical systems that,
Yeah, they look great.
yeah,
These are technical instruments. It's very fair
it's,
to call them that.
they're very cool.
And I also mentioned earlier that
think
these have large image circles. The 28 and 50 millimeter lenses from Schneider, the image circles are 72 and 79.2 millimeters, which means that the image, they'll technically cover a 6x7 camera format. Maybe the edges may not be too sharp, but they'll cover it. You'll get an image, you'll get light. And that's pretty interesting stuff. Schneider also makes for Mamiya, a 120 millimeter f5.6 that they call a TS spheric, and that's made specifically in conjunction with Mamiya for a 645, and I'm assuming the phase cameras as well. And again, it's probably the same optical formula for both of the Schneider 120s. I'm assuming. Don't quote me on that. If you are toting around a Leica S medium format camera, you can buy a 120mm f/5.6 TS-Apochromatic Elmar S Aspheric, which I imagine is an amazing lens. It's only for Leica S series, but if you have that camera and you would like to do tilt shifting and correcting of perspective, you can do it. You have any experience with those? I've never.
No.
No.
Looking at the price, I will have experience with it.
Just sell your boat. What's the problem? You just got to make a trade-off. Now, also, if you want a Hasselblad system, Hasselblad, for their current lens, they don't make any tilt shifts, but they do make the HTS 1.5 tilt shift adapter, which enables you to use a Hasselblad H series camera with either 35, 50, 80, or 100mm lenses for a certain amount of adjustments of perspective control and tilt. So you can do that. And again, this is an extra option that you have. If you are not fortunate enough to have a Hasselblad H series camera, but you do have, say, a Canon or a Nikon or a 35mm that you like, Horseman makes a TS Pro Tilt Shift Kit. And what it is, it's sort of like a view camera. You have a front standard and a rear standard. The front is where your lens is adapted, and the rear is where your camera goes with a bellows in between. And you can tilt the front and back to emulate tilt-shift movements of a view camera or a tilt-shift lens. And you could adapt pretty much any camera, full frame or APS-C, to many of these systems. Cambo makes a similar arrangement. They have several of them. There's the Actus ACTUS GFX view camera body and lens mount. If you have a Fuji GFX, you can, for $2,895, buy one of these, and basically it goes in between your camera and your lens, and now you can do perspective control and playing around with focus shifting using your Fuji GFX.
That's the price today.
That's the price today. That's right. Who knows about tomorrow? If you have a 35mm or a APS-C format camera, Cambo also makes the Actus-B view camera bodies, in which you could take your Canon, your Nikon, your Pentax. I'm not sure of all the mounts, and I'm pretty sure there's a Fuji mount in there as well for the X series cameras. And basically use your existing system for doing tilt and shift controls. There might be limitations to how far you could tilt, shift, or use some of these controls depending on the camera and lens combination. But there are a lot of options out there. And it gets you away from straight just stopping down and leaning buildings.
Mm-hmm. You didn't mention the ones that are in my price range, though. The Rokinon.
Now let's go. Okay, now for John, we have two lenses available here. Again, I think it's important to mention that a lot of these are very pricey. However, you can get from
2,000 to 3,000. I mean,
2,000 to 3,000
for the Canon Nikons in general.
Now, for $700, you can buy the Rokinon or Samyang 24mm f3.5 tilt shifts. They both make them. It's essentially the same lens. They do focus down to a little under 8 inches, which is very close for 24mm. You get 8.5 plus minus 8.5 degrees of tilt and plus minus 12 millimeters of shift. They do have dual aspheric and dual ED elements. These lenses are sharp. They vary, like the all lenses vary sample to sample. These might vary a little bit more, a little bit less. I've gotten some very good pictures with these. As I mentioned earlier, we've spoke about it, that there can be certain distortion issues you get with these lenses. Everything has a price, figuratively and literally, but they're very good.
We've done reviews on these lenses over the years, and they're incredibly. They're very sharp. I mean, I don't think that's.
I've gotten some wonderful pictures using the 24. I believe it was the Rokinon that I had for a while with a Nikon mount. And I used it on a Sony A7R2, and I got very good pictures.
Right.
Yeah. No,
and then there's the Lens Baby option to go if you want a low cost entry into the tilt market.
For selective focus. Yeah.
And then there's the secondhand market where, as you mentioned, there's a Leica / Schneider 28 shift. The older Nikon shift lenses, which are incredibly good and can be had
for a few $100s,
several $100s.
Yeah,
Olympus, and I think you said there was a Minolta one as well.
Yes.
Yep. A lot of those companies made great lenses back in the day, and you can still buy them today. And if you're shooting mirrorless, you just grab an adapter.
Yeah. The only recommendation I'd make, and again, I'm talking specifically from my experience with the older Nikons, the 35 and the 28 millimeter. If you're given a choice, go for the newer models. Those are and the 35 millimeter would be the 2.8, not the 3.5, and the 28 millimeter, the 3.5, not 4. They're both good, but the newer, faster ones do have it on edge sharpness. No two ways about that. And again, you can pick them up for a few $100s, and they're very usable. They're very, very good. Any other thoughts?
No.
Tilt and shift.
Tilt and shift.
Jason's going to set a new dance for us. Right?
No, I mean, I guess my final thought is that there's a practical purpose to these lenses, and some people need that for the type of photography they do, but they're also a lot of fun to use.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
you can, again, these are technical lenses that have a lot of good creative possibilities, and you could play.
Yeah, I like the process of photography, and having more things to tweak and adjust on the camera is not always great if you're running and gunning, but if you're working off a tripod and stuff, it makes it a cool experience.
Yeah. And again, if all of this stuff is really just out of your price range, what you do is go down to a Auto World and get yourself a radiator hose, cut it down, get some radiator clamps, some hose clamps on there, put one in the lens, one in the lens, and just hand hold it and bend it. And you might get some good stuff. You never know. And I would say stick to close-ups.
Someone made a tilt shift adapter for Nikon with a 3D printer.
Oh, wow.
So you could turn any lens into a tilt shift. Of course, a regular lens doesn't have the same size image circle, but that might be the future of tilting and shifting is make your own.
One thing real quickly, jumping back to the Rokinon and Samyang. The Samyang has mounts for Nikon F, Canon EF, and Sony A, but the Rokinon has Nikon F, Canon EF, Pentax K, Sony A, and Sony E for their mirrorless.
Yes.
However, nothing yet for Fujifilm X mounts.
Got to adapt.
They'll have to adapt it.
Yeah. The thing is, they're easily adaptable.
Yep.
You know, so it's not really an issue. You could pretty much use it on
electronics aren't an
anything.
issue, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the other thing. When you're looking at the secondhand market, all these things are manual focus. Very few of them have electronic gizmos inside of them. So you can get 20, 30-year-old lenses, and it's going to work almost exactly the same as the ones that are made today.
And they slow you down.
Yep.
So there we have it. Another fabulous podcast from the folks at B&H. Thank you, John Harris. Thank you, Jason Tables. And thank you, Todd Vorenkamp, for joining us today. You're always welcome here.
Thanks for having me.
And you behaved yourself. We're very, very proud.
I try.
Just knock first.
I try. Yeah. Love the studio. Love what you've done with the place.
The new wallpaper's wonderful. So remember, as I always remind you up front, subscribe to our show if you're not a subscriber as of yet. Go to iTunes. Take a look at our landing page. Take a look at our show notes and all the links and the photographs that go along with these shows. It adds a nice extra dimension to it. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in today.